Wow, yeah.
Is it?
Do we have a quorum? Do we have a quorum?
We're doing less somebody else. Senate, please come to order. Are there any announcements?
Bills for adjustment.
We have a quorum.
Nope.
We don't need. That brings us to the orders of the day. Do we have the report on this, Bill? I don't believe we do. It's Senator Campion. Your question is well taken. We will work to round up a few more senators in order to get us to the requisite number. Thank you.
Oh, we have two online. Oh, hands on.
15. Everyone who counts is here.
15, 16
Good one, Rob.
We got two online. Oh, we get.
Oh, look at that. We do have some more.
All right, we now do have a quorum. Thank you, Senator from Chittenden Southeast. So that brings us to S-191. S-191 has passed the Senate and the House has sent us back a proposal of amendment. The standing question would be, shall the Senate concur with the House proposal of amendment? Are you ready for the question? Senator, the question is, are you ready for the question? If someone wants to say something, they need to stand up. Senator from Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. President. S-191 is located on page 4249 of today's calendar. As senators may remember, the original bill that Senate Education brought forward included the first two sections regarding changing the residency requirements for advancement grants and incentive grants. The substance of those sections remain unchanged. The previous version of the bill included cross-references to other statutes that provided definitions for the three different immigration statuses. Instead of requiring readers to flip back and forth between different statutes, the other body copied the definitions and placed them into the bill for ease of reference. The effect of the first two sections remains the same. Now, the substantive change comes in sections 3, 4, and 5. Section 3 creates a new statute in Title 16, specifically in the section that governs the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. It provides that residents who are otherwise eligible for a state-funded financial aid program administered by VSAC will not be deemed ineligible solely on the basis of their immigration status in federal law. The rest of the application and screening process, including its competitive nature, remain the same. Additionally, there is express language that the procedure and applications must be permitted under federal law, and VSAC must also provide updates regarding the impact of this section in its biannual report to the legislature. Section 4 requires that any policies adopted by the Board of Trustees for the Vermont State College System shall not discriminate or exclude a person based solely on their immigration status they would otherwise qualify for and meet requirements for Vermont residency for tuition purposes as set forth by the board and as permitted under federal law. This is the current policy for the state college system. They've also stated that the provision codifies their policy into law so that it's safeguarded moving into the future. The last provision in section 4 requires that information that identifies students be kept confidential unless otherwise provided by law or consent of the student. Section 5 is related to establishing residency for the purpose of being eligible for in-state tuition. This section requires the Board of Trustees to adopt policies related to residency for tuition purposes consistent with state and federal requirements that do not exclude people based on their immigration status if they would otherwise be eligible for in-state tuition. Section 6 are the effective dates. So that's the overview of the other body's amendment. And I want to wrap up by saying that the proposals that were added are, as I've learned, they're not an experimental idea. Currently, VSAC and our schools are not weighing or considering immigration status in their application process. Additionally, 24 other states do have statutes that provide similar access to post-secondary education assistance and in-state tuition status for those who qualify. Considering that we have a declining student enrollment and a severe workforce shortage, it is a logical step forward to allow available education opportunities to those who wish to pursue them. The affirmative language to allow access to all of the post-secondary education public benefits for aliens who do not fall under subsection A, Title 8, Section 1621 of the US Code is required under federal law, and that is specifically in subsection B of 1621. The federal language exempts aliens who do not fall under any of the alien or non-immigrant categories from the prohibition against accessing public aid and benefits. So just to be clear, I'm not trying to obfuscate with legalese or citing federal law, so I will just say that, yes, this does also include individuals who are considered undocumented. State and public benefits are defined as any grant, contract, loan, professional license, or commercial license provided by an agency of a state or local government. The language in the federal statute also expressly states that aid and benefits related to post-secondary education are permissible. The process of acquiring financial aid remains a competitive one. Applicants still have to go through a scrutinizing process to determine whether they are eligible for financial aid, just like anyone else. This includes a process where transcripts, essays, letters of recommendation, other required material are submitted to VSAC or the college for consideration. Students must also demonstrate the financial need. We received more testimony from the general counsel at VSAC who supports these amendments. They also stated they do not believe there would be an impact on the funds available to serve students, nor would this cost additional money. I also personally spoke with a representative of the state college system and a representative of UVM, both of whom expressed support for these changes. The vote in committee was 3-2-0, and I ask for the Senate's support to concur with the proposal of amendment.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the Senate concur with the House proposal of amendment on S 191, an act relating to new American educational grant opportunities? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have concurred with the House proposal of amendment on S 191. We move now to JRS 44, a joint resolution declaring the increasing number of drug overdose deaths in Vermont to be a public health emergency. That joint resolution moved to the Health and Welfare Committee, and for the report of that committee, I would look to the senator from Chittenden Central District. Oops, please listen first to the second reading of the bill.
JRS 44, joint resolution declaring the increasing number of drug overdose deaths in Vermont to be a public health emergency.
And now the senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you all know, a resolution isn't about enacting legislation. It's not a policy mandate, but a resolution does provide us with a vehicle to make a declaration. And in this case, JRS 44 declares that the increasing number of drug overdose deaths in Vermont is a public health emergency. The resolution was brought to us from my colleague and seatmate, Senator Vyhovsky. She had this resolution drafted on behalf of a constituent who's lost loved ones to a drug overdose, as so many in our communities have. Making a statement on our position does matter, and it sends a message of intent. It points to something we deem critically important and vital to highlight. It's part of a vision. We've done a lot of work around substance abuse disorder and health and welfare, peer recovery coaches, recovery residences, OPCs, overdose prevention centers, just to name a few. The resolution has many critical data points. I had considered not reading it, but I believe I will read it to you. I hope when I'm done reading that you will all vote in favor of this resolution, which left our committee on a 5-0-0 vote. So JRS 44, joint resolution declaring the increasing number of drug overdose deaths in Vermont to be a public health emergency. Whereas the use of drugs, especially opioids in Vermont, regardless of whether the use originated with an initial prescription, an over-the-counter purchase, or the purchase of an unregulated drug, has led to an increasingly severe opioid use crisis that has killed far too many Vermonters. And whereas the victims are not only the individuals who die, but also their families and friends, creating a broader human tragedy. And whereas Department of Health data reveals the severity of drug overdose deaths in Vermont. And whereas the number of Vermonters who have perished due to drug overdoses, be they designated as accidental or undetermined, continues to accelerate, rising from 42 in 2010 to 264 in 2022, and representing a 500% increase over this time frame. And whereas of these drug overdoses, those that involved an opioid grew from 37 in 2010 to 239 in 2022, excluding those deaths deemed to be suicide. And whereas the opioids causing these deaths are now more toxic than in prior years, as fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that is 50 times more potent than heroin, was involved in 93% of the 2022 opioid overdose fatalities. And according to preliminary data, in 110 of the 115 drug overdose deaths recorded for the first 6 months of 2023. And whereas other drugs contributing to overdose deaths in 2022 included cocaine, 49%, heroin, 9%, gabapentin, 13%, up from 2% in 2021, methamphetamine, 8%, and xylazine, which the FDA has only approved for veterinary use, 28%, up from 13% in 2021. And whereas 87% of opioid-based drug overdose deaths in 2022 involved at least 2 substances, and 25% involved 4 or more. And whereas this rise in the number of drug overdose deaths is occurring despite the existence of extensive state and federally funded treatment services. And whereas these services are clearly insufficient in reaching all individuals experiencing a substance use disorder, because according to a 2020 social autopsy, the department documented that 76% of the Vermonters who had died from an accidental drug overdose had no known history of accessing treatment. And whereas the severe problems associated with opioid use disorder show no signs of abating, and the implementation of more effective solution is an urgent imperative, now therefore be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the General Assembly declares the increasing number of drug overdose deaths in Vermont to be a public health emergency. And be it further resolved that the Secretary of State be directed to send a copy of this resolution to Governor Philip B. Scott and to Commissioner of Health, Dr. Mark Levine. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Perhaps this is a Scrivener's error, or could be treated as such. I believe on the third whereas, data, plural, should be reveal. Datum would be reveals. So I'm just thinking perhaps we should delete the S on reveal. Because
We will treat that as a Scrivener's error to be reviewed, and we'll let the folks, you may well be right, you probably are, but I don't know for certain, and we'll let those folks who know that sort of thing be aware.
versus datum, yes. Thank you.
Right. Maybe the senator from Addison will clarify as well, but senator from Chittenden Central.
I want to rise in support of this and to thank the Senate Health and Welfare Committee for taking this so seriously and doing such great work on this. I don't imagine any one of us hasn't been somehow touched by the opioid crisis that is facing us. And while I know resolutions don't enact policy, they do make a statement. And I think it's a critically important statement for every Vermonter who has been touched by the crisis that is the overdose emergency, to know that we take it seriously and we recognize it as a public health emergency. So thank you.
Question is, shall the resolution be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have ordered third reading of JRS 44. That now brings us to S98. S98 was passed and referred to the House, which has, well, would you like us to pass over this? or-
Yes, please. Mr. President, Ledge Council was not available to meet with us, so we'll take it up tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Okay, before I take up 213, are we ready for that? All right, we have up for consideration S 213. 213 passed the Senate and was referred to the House. The House has returned the bill with a proposal of amendment. Standing question is, shall the Senate concur with the House proposal of amendment? Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Natural Resources and Energy met and reviewed the proposal amendment for additional testimony. And on a 4-1-0 vote, we recommend that the Senate concur. There are 9 instances of amendment, which, and just to remind people, 213 was the Flood Safety Act. The provisions are all just, I would say, tuning language. So first instance of amendment adds the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, the mapping enterprise that's part of the bill. In the second instance, second, third, and fourth instances of amendment, it's conforming language that just brings up to date the way that we use the terms flood hazard area versus river corridor. In the fifth instance of amendment, there's a rulemaking on wetlands, and the House spent some additional time and recommending a process for how that rule, provisions that that rule should accommodate. For instance, temporary access across and through wetlands in order to work like replacement of utility lines and poles. The sixth instance of amendment is language that's actually new to the bill, and it addresses an unusual situation of a wastewater treatment facility in Shoreham, Vermont, that in the town, working with the Agency of Natural Resources roughly 25 years ago, put in a small wastewater treatment facility and using sort of a novel technology. That permit is expiring, and this language allows for the permit for the plant to continue to operate. There's more than one way to measure performance, and this provides for an alternate way of qualifying. In short, we often focus on the concentration of phosphorus in effluent, but really it's mostly relevant because you take concentration times how much and you get poundage. Turns out this very small facility generates very little phosphorus, and it operates within the guidelines of the waste load allocation level, and it's consistent with the TMDL for Lake Champlain. Seventh instance of amendment is in the dams section of the bill. It's an adjustment that adds a provision related to the Green River Dam, and it directs the Agency of Natural Resources to do an analysis of that dam in terms of costs of maintenance and operations. The eighth instance of amendment is a new report that the House added. The proposal here is to study whether or not A&R permit fees might be income sensitized. So that is just a report coming back to the next legislature. Ninth instance of amendment was adjustment of effective dates to accommodate the conforming changes and transition timing between having dams under the purview of the PUC versus having them move over to A&R. And that completes my report. And we recommend that the Senate concur.
Question is, shall the Senate concur with the House proposal amendment? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
Nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you've concurred with the House Proposal Amendment on S 213. We now have up for consideration H 862. Third reading of H 862 has been ordered. H 862 is an act relating to approval of amendments to the charter of the town of Barry. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 862, an act relating to approval of amendments to the charter of the town of Barry.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H 862. I do want to apologize. I was instructed to pass over H 81, and I know that was a question that some people might have on their minds. But
Is the intention, we hope, to come back to H 81 today?
I don't know what the intention is. That would be a question for the President Pro Tem,
And inquire of the pro tem, please.
if he so chooses to be interrogated.
My intention is to take the direction of the Chair of the Committee of Jurisdiction, who has asked me to pass over to. Thank you.
So we have up for consideration, I believe, H 869. H 869 is an act relating to approval of the merger of Brandon Fire District Number 1 and Brandon Fire District Number 2. And it has been referred for third reading. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 869, an act relating to approval of the merger of the Brandon Fire District Number 1 and Brandon Fire District Number 2.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H 869. We now have up for consideration third reading and passage of H 872. H 872 is an act relating to miscellaneous updates to the powers of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council and the duties of law enforcement officers. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 872, an act relating to miscellaneous updates to the powers of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council and the duties of law enforcement officers.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H 872. That brings us, I believe, to H 630. Second reading, please, excuse me, H 630 is an act relating to boards of cooperative education services. It was read for the first time for the Committee on Education, which considered the same and recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which considers that when amended as offered by the Committee on Education, that the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H 630, an act relating to boards of cooperative education services.
I've heard the second reading of the bill for the report of the Committee on Education, the Senator from Chittenden Central.
H 630, also known as the BOCES bill, is a bill that will create efficiencies and be a cost saver for the state of Vermont. BOCES stands for Boards of Cooperative Education Services. And we are one of only 9 states that actually doesn't do this. It's a very common practice across the country. You're going to be getting a map soon, hopefully, that I photocopy too. But yeah, so BOCES, they allow LEA, school districts, supervisory unions to come together to share resources. So, for example, if you are in a rural district and you don't have the economies of scale that could really provide what you need in an efficient and cost-effective way, with the BOCES, you will be able to partner with other districts in your region to, for example, work together to get a contract on food services, on transportation, on special ed services. If there is a teacher that, for example, is hard to come by in the state of Vermont, like let's say speech and language pathologist, you'll be able to work with another school district in your BOCES to hire that person at maybe a 0.5 FTE. And then another district in your BOCES will be able to also have that employee at 0.5. And you'll be able to work together to streamline scheduling and everything else. So this is a real benefit to the state of Vermont in so many ways. Another part of this bill that is not necessarily BOCES related has to do with community schools. Community schools was enacted back in 2021. And community schools are just an incredible model of wraparound services within a school. So if you have a student who is suffering from homelessness, for example, a community school will do the work necessary to provide a mattress for that student or a place for that student to stay. If a student hasn't had a visit to the dentist in 10 years, the community school will make sure that student gets the dental care that they need in a timely fashion. So community schools are really important, and this bill will allow them to continue at least for one more year, and then they will be looked at every year henceforth. But this keeps it going for one more year. And one of the reasons why it's important to keep community schools going is that we need more data. They've only been around since 2021. Part of that, we were in COVID. We need more data to really strengthen what we know is already working, but continuing the community schools will really help with that. So the bill itself, let's go through it. And you may see that you've got a map in front of you. That map, as you will learn, delineates the 7 BOCES that will hopefully exist in the future. And you can see them, and I'll speak to them in a little bit. So the first part of the bill is the findings or the intent, and you can go ahead and read them. They're very compelling, but I'm not going to read them to you. I've already touched on a few. The second section of the bill, 16 VSA Chapter 10, this section adds a new chapter with 7 new sections to Title 16 to govern the creation and operation of boards of cooperative education services, or BOCES. You will see in this section the policy, you will see definitions, you will see the creation of BOCES along with an organization, approval of the secretary. You will see that the BOCES is considered a body politic or corporate with powers and duties afforded them under this contract. You will see articles of agreement. And in the articles agreement, they must include, for example, a cost benefit analysis, which is really important. We want this to save money ultimately, outlining the projected financial savings or enhanced outcomes, or both preferably, that are expected from the BOCES formation. It does not take effect unless approved by all members of an SU or SU boards, and the Secretary of Ed finds the formation of a BOCES is, 1, in the best interest of the state, students, and member SUs, and 2, aligns with policy in Section 601. And then if you look on page 8, you will see that the articles of agreement must include certain information, and this is outlined here. For example, the names of the participating supervisory unions, the mission, the purpose, the focus of the BOCES, programs and services that will be offered by the BOCES, etc. I'm not going to read them all in the interest of time. You will also see that the BOCES cannot be a member of or officer or employee of any related for-profit or nonprofit organization. They can establish subcommittees and create policies and procedures, and they meet not fewer than 4 times annually. You will also see, as I mentioned in the map, that there will be no more than 7 BOCES statewide. And these 7 regions were really sort of came up organically because they're already starting to share some resources in these parts of the state. And also during COVID, it was shown that superintendents in these regions were collaborating kind of naturally. So section 604, the powers of the BOCES. Sounds like a movie. Provide educational programs, services, facilities, and professional and other staff to best serve the needs of its members. Has to follow all applicable laws, including IDEA and section 504. Has to have an executive director that serves under the direction of the board of directors who evaluates the ED's performance annually. And the ED cannot be a board member, officer, or employee of any related, as I said, for-profit or nonprofit organization. It shall be a body politic or a corporate, which is a subdivision of the state, and they can contract. They may apply for cooperative grants, but no entitlement to federal funds distributed by AOE to LEAs. If you go to section 605, this is about financing, budgeting, and accounting. BOCES must manage its own education cooperative fund where all its money goes. They shall appoint a treasurer who may be a member school district treasurer. They must use a uniform chart of accounts as its financial accounting system. They must undergo an independent audit annually, and copy of the audit goes to member SUs. And they must prepare an annual financial statement, adopt an annual budget, and they also may take out loans. In section 606, you've got the annual report with and public information. So the BOCES has to prepare an annual report and distribute it to its members, and they must maintain a website with certain information. Section 607, employment. The BOCES is a public employer required to conduct annual area survey of salaries of staff employed by member SUs. They can only employ licensed educators. Educators can participate in the state teachers retirement system. Non-educators can participate in the Vermont Municipal Employees Retirement System. Employees entitled to organize pursuant to Title 16 and 21 as applicable. And employees are provided health care benefits pursuant to the Commission on Public School Employee Health Benefits. There will be a transition, which I think is really important. And this is section 3 of the bill. On or before July 1st, 2026, so we're looking a couple of years out, all SUs have to consider and vote on the desirability or not of establishing a BOCES. SUs that vote yes need to hold an organizational meeting on or before July 1st of 2027. On or before July 1st, 2028, the AOE has to review, the BOCES that are in existence. On or before November 1st of 2028, the AOE has to report on the number of BOCES and the number of SUs that are not members of BOCES. And they have to make recommendations for expansion of membership and powers of BOCES, including a recommendation on whether membership should be mandatory. Section 4, the BOCES grant program and the appropriation. Let's see, is there someone else speaking to this? There is going to be, I believe, $70,000 coming from the Ed Fund to the AOE for the grant program. And the $10K that will go to each BOCES is just for startup costs, just to get the BOCES going and to get things organized and to help this all get off the ground. All right, hopefully you're all still with me. Section 5, duties of the Supervisory Union Board. That's what you've got there. Sections 6 through 11, conforming changes to allow the applicable retirement, collective bargaining, and healthcare laws to include BOCES employees. I will not go through those, but as I said, there's sections 6 through 11. Section 12 is the section on community schools, and that is on page 23. And again, it invokes the 2021 Act 67, which started community schools. It gives a little bit of a background in the importance of community schools to the state of Vermont, the health of our kids, and the wellness of our communities. And a couple more here. Section 14 is the appropriation that we requested and was granted for $1 million for community schools. And then we also have the effective date, which is section 12. The act shall take effect on July 1st, 2024. That is my report. We voted this out of committee 3-2-0. And we heard from a lot of fantastic folks. And I have to tell you, the most compelling testimony that we got came from Windham County. It actually came from Windham Central Supervisory Union. Stephanie Betsy Hancock, who's the Director of Student Support Services, and Kim Oliveira, who's the Executive Director of the Vermont Learning Collaborative. So Windham has actually already created their own collaborative. And so we wanted to hear from them as to, well, why do you need BOCES if you've already done this? And one of the things that they said was that it was hard to do. Starting a 501c3 off the ground took time, took effort. And because there is no structure in place, there's no system that we have, they had to invent the wheel, basically. And it was hard. So this BOCES bill will really allow for a system and a structure that will make the work that I just outlined for you much more seamless and much easier than what Windham had to go through to create their collaborative. So I hope you will all agree that this is a good bill, and I hope you vote yes on the BOCES bill. And one last thing before I sit down. A lot of folks don't like the word BOCES, but we decided it would really take a lot of work to change the BOCES. So my suggestion is keep the BOCES, but just pronounce it differently. We could say bocce, for example, or think of anything else that you might like. But that's my report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Bill is entered for the Committee on Appropriations for the report of the Committee on Appropriations Center from Chittenden Central.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The appropriations report, Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. We did receive this bill in appropriations, and our discussion focused almost exclusively on section 14, the appropriation for community schools at $1 million. Part of that discussion centered around the fact that it comes from the education fund. Was that an appropriate use of the education fund or not? We had strong testimony from the Committee of Jurisdiction and my colleague from Chittenden Central that they regarded this as squarely within the mission of the Ed Fund. And so we voted in concurrence with the Committee of Jurisdiction 601.
Question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Education? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Windham.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter of the bill?
Senator from Chittenden Central is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you. Mr. President, I'm very supportive of this bill. It sounds wonderful. I heard a reference to page 23, and I did not have a page 23 in my information.
I apologize. I have a page 23, so I don't know.
So the as passed House version of H 630 that I have goes 1 through 22.
Oh.
On page 22 is the effective date, section 12, about halfway down. Is that what most people have? Seems like that BOCES got guarded. What, Do you have, is it as passed the House or is that as
I am
introduced?
looking at the Senate, that the Senate proposed to the House that the bill be amended
Okay,
by
so
striking out.
there's probably a reflection of it in your calendar
Okay.
and you working outside of the calendar and nobody
sorry.
else has the document that you have.
Yeah.
So the bill in the calendar is found on page 4260 and runs through 4276. So my guess is that the language you were referring to is found on page 4275 and 76. So you're talking about section 14, and yes, and sections 15, 4275 and 4276 in today's calendar.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I think it's also 4273 because it's the community school section. I will. read
There we
on
go.
my own. I think the reporter is up.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to briefly speak to community schools, since we've had one in Bennington for a long time now, the Molly Stark School. And let senators know that the community schools really address our neediest students. This is a school that does everything from scheduling dental appointments. At one point, they actually had a dentist come in. Doctor's appointments, as the senator from Chittenden Central described, really wraparound services. So I appreciate the committee's work on this, and I very much appreciate appropriations digging into this and approving it as an acceptable expenditure from the education fund. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Madison,
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter of the bill?
Senator from Chittenden Central as a reporter.
Thank you. I am totally in support of the BOCES concept. And in fact, I grew up in rural upstate or central New York that has a well-established BOCES system. And my mom was a special educator who worked for our Tompkins County BOCES program. So I'm very familiar with it. And it's very funny that you mentioned the name because it was a household thing in my house. Mom has to go to BOCES. But my question is in the transition report section 3, and it shows up throughout the bill, I think. It talks about supervisory union boards and a vote that the supervisory union board has to make. I don't believe every school district is a member of a supervisory union board. I believe my own school district, the Addison Central School District, no longer is a part of a supervisory union because it's an independent school district. And I'm just wondering what happens to the districts that are no longer in SUs.
So are you on page
4268, section 3, transition report, on or before July 1st, 26, each supervisory union board shall consider and vote on. And then it talks about what supervisory union boards have to do in a number of areas. And I'm wondering if this also is a vote that a school district has to make that is not part of a school supervisory union.
That is a good question. My understanding is that yes, there will need to be a vote. Because if you look at these larger groups, there will, can I take a recess?
We'll declare a recess till the fall of the gavel.
Thanks. I think we're ready.
Senator, please come to order. Well, we were just getting the, we were getting the microphone set up.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That's fine. Senator from Addison has the floor, interrogating the senator from Chittenden Central.
Yes, and I believe that the senator has an answer to my question.
I do have an answer, thanks to our wonderful ledge counsel who ran up here. And I probably should have known this, so my apologies, but our system in Vermont is quite Byzantine and complicated. So supervisory district, a supervisory district is a supervisory union. So is considered a supervisory union. So every school district in the state of Vermont is a supervisory union by definition.
Or
So-
part of a supervisory union. If they
Yes.
are in a single district, they are also a supervisory union, or they can be a school district that's a member of a larger supervisory union.
Correct.
Yeah.
Clarification.
I thank the senator. And I just want to make one comment about the community schools. I'm supportive of community schools and I think they do great work. And I also want to say that school districts that are not community schools also often provide the same types of services that the chair of education was mentioning in terms of dental care and wraparound services for kids. And they do so using money from the education fund for social services. And it's one of the challenges of our education funding system, but there are lots of schools that provide those kinds of services, including the community schools. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Education? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I appreciate the work of my colleagues on the Education Committee, in particular the chairman and my fellow colleagues, with a month of deep analysis of the BOCES concept, I have to recognize, and I think we need to recognize, that education in Vermont is not on stable ground right now. We've got a Secretary of Education who's newly in the seat with unstable ground. We've got a property tax issue. We lack a unifying vision for Vermont's educational system. And while BOCES is a great concept, Vermont already has the nation's #1 ratio of administrators to students, and that ratio costs us money. And there is already a mechanism in statute to collaborate between SUs, as evidenced by the experience in Wyndham. The timing isn't right to inject a new layer of bureaucracy into our state's education system before we analyze and report back the statewide education deficiencies. So I believe we're putting the cart before the horse. We're trying to solve a problem that we really need to more deeply analyze before we bring the BOCES system online, if we bring the BOCES system online. So again, I respect my colleagues. I just needed to represent the committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question, Senator from Chittenden Central.
I appreciate the comments of my colleague from Rutland. And I would just like to say that although the BOCES will require a few positions, i.e. treasurer and director, et cetera, these are folks who are already working in the system. They're not necessarily folks we're hiring from without to come in and run the show. We have seen that BOCES is something that happens organically in our system when groups of people want to come together and share resources. This is about sharing, this is about collaborating, and this is about creating efficiencies and saving money. So I just want to make that distinction for folks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate what was just said about the attempt to reduce the administrative burden, which is what I believe BOCES would do. I also want to point out that the mechanism in law currently to create these collaborations is to develop a 501c3. And as we heard in testimony, creating a 501c3 is a very long and burdensome and expensive process, oftentimes taking over a year. So the purpose of the BOCES is to streamline things and make them more efficient in order to foster these collaborations between districts. Thank you.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. I watched not long ago a 3-hour battle about trying to take some after-school funding and have some other organizations use that funding to just put kids first in education in after-school programs. And I really don't see much difference here at spending money where it's already been spent. I hear the senator's comments about that it doesn't take much, but when you hire an executive director of $100,000 a year or whatever it might be, and then hearing the senator's comments from Rutland about where we're in crisis with our education system, I just don't think it's a time right now to be trotting out new programs to already put another burden on our education system that's already in financial distress and causing 20% or higher tax bills to be going out here soon to our Vermonters. And it's something I can't support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
I know I don't have to respond to everything, but I would like to. So I would just posit that when something's in crisis, just sitting and doing nothing is probably not a great response. That's one thing I would say. Another thing I would say is that, education is expensive in the state of Vermont. Why? Because we have a rural state and we have rivers and mountains that makes it hard to get around. We have declining enrollment. We have an aging population. We don't have economies of scale. The BOCES is something that really captivates and captures this idea of economies of scale so that folks can get together and contract out on services that might otherwise not be available to them. So I would urge you to think deeply. This isn't a black, white, right, wrong. This is a complicated process that's going to require some folks to take a little bit of a leap of faith into a brighter future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Education? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have adopted the report of the Committee on Education. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you've ordered third reading of H 630. That now brings us to the next item on our calendar, which is H 657. H 657 was read for the first time and referred to the Committee on Finance, which recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations that also indicates that when amended as recommended by the Committee on Finance, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H 657, an act relating to the modernization of Vermont's communications, taxes, and fees.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report from the Committee on Finance, Senator from Chittenden Southeast, Senator Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a substitute amendment to the Senate Finance Report that I'm hoping will be passed around. And unless anybody tells me I can't, I will be speaking to both the substitute amendment, the Finance Report, and the underlying bill.
You can move the substitute.
I'd like to move the substitute
Right.
amendment to the Senate Finance Report.
Right, so the pending question will right now, when it comes up, will be, shall the Senate substitute the amendment as offered by the senator from Washington and others?
This is the yield bill. This is the wrong handout. We got the wrong handout. I'm sorry.
We'll take just a moment. You can just set that to the side for the moment and we'll get you the proper piece of paper. I was a little confused that it was a senator from Washington on that as well.
In the interest of time, I'd be happy to start my report, which is honestly quite lengthy.
Let's pause for a moment. I'm going to check with the secretary if he has the substitute amendment. Where we know you gave it up. We'll declare a brief recess till the fall. Senate will please come to order. I believe the proper handout is coming around. I will urge you not to lose the other handout, because that will be important at some point in the future. Senator from Chittenden has moved that the Senate substitute the handout amendment in place of the Finance Committee amendment. And therefore, at the moment, generally the conversation would be between those two, but you can do what you need to do unless someone objects.
Appreciate that, Mr. President.
You bet.
All right. So I will be speaking to both the substitute amendment, the finance report, and the underlying bill. This bill really has three chunks designed to modernize our telecommunications revenue models to adapt to the times we now live in. Sections 1 through 6 really address our declining revenue in the Vermont Universal Service Fund, leading to insufficient funds to sustain our enhanced 911 and critical telecom support services. That'll be the first chunk. The second chunk, for lack of a better term, sections 7 through 13 are going to be addressing the declining revenue in a very outdated telephone personal property tax, which dates to the 1940s. The last chunk, which is section 14, previously 13A in the underlying bill, section 14 in the substitute amendment is an incremental step to have the Agency of Transportation, VTrans, assess telecommunication companies for how telecommunication companies use our state-owned right-of-way. So now I'm going to start on sections 1 through 6, which really have to do with the Vermont Universal Service Fee. Right now, the USF, the Vermont USF, is a charge of 2.4% on all retail voice telecommunication services. The Vermont USF currently raises just under $6 million a year, and its revenues are declining as currently configured because it only taxes phone service on our cell phones, voice service. It does not tax the data services we increasingly rely on and pay most of our wireless bills on. This is because the Internet Tax Freedom Act in 1998 prohibits taxation on internet service. So federal laws are preempting us from charging fees on data services, but our 911 emergency response services still need to be adequately funded. Thus, the need for this bill. Voice services have been declining for decades as people increasingly rely on data services for texting, emailing, and Zooming. With this shift in our telecom economy, we now have disparity between types of users. For example, my friend down the road on Dorset Street, down in South Burlington, still has a landline. He pays about $50 a month for that service. Our USF, of our Universal Service Fee of 2.4% costs him about $1.20 a month. Compare that to my household. We dropped our landline about 6 years ago, so we just have cell phones. We don't have a landline anymore. Because this 2.4% only applies to voice services, I'm paying 13 cents on each of my lines. I have actually an optional handout, which actually shows one of pages from my thank you very much. And this is a breakdown of my personal cell phone bill and one of my kids' accounts. You can actually see the breakdown of the fees. But the point I want to highlight here is that right now, we are only able to tax the voice services on our cell phone, not the data services. So our wireless customers are paying a lot less than our landline customers, which are often in more rural communities. Our Vermonters in rural areas relying on landlines because they don't have good cell coverage are paying a lot more than our wireless customers. This bill will rectify that inequity by fixing the fee to be a fixed 72 cents per line. So that 13 cents that you're seeing on one page of my cell phone bill is for one of my kids' phone lines. We have 5 lines in the house, and in total, I'm paying about 65 cents every month, compared to my friend down the street with 1 line who's paying $1.20. Now, this is an important piece to me because I got my kids' cell phones because I want them to be able to call me or 911 in an emergency, not because I want them on the TikTok. So that was an attempt at humor, trying to keep it lively. All right, this fixed per line charge aligns our current funding source with the very real need of enhanced 911 services in conformance with the Internet Tax Freedom Act. Important to note is that the fund for our E911 services are insufficient to sustain, that the current ESF does not sufficiently sustain our E911 program costs because of those declining revenues for the past several years. We've actually been backfilling the shortfall with general fund dollars, this year to the tune of more than $1 million. This change resynchronizes our universal service fee to fund all of our 911 services. A 2022 report by the Agency of Administration recommended these changes to the USF, the Vermont USF, to ensure the long-term sustainability of E911. This bill implements the recommendation from that report. And all those reports we pass, they do result in positive, strong, well-considered policy. I also want to highlight that beyond Enhanced 911, the Vermont Universal Service Fee also currently supports the telephone relay service, also Vermont Lifeline services for our most vulnerable Vermonters, the connectivity fund, as well as any money remaining would go to the Vermont Community Broadband Board. This bill also adds another directed fund of the 988 Suicide and Crisis line to also receive funding from these Vermont Universal Service fees as funds become available. And to address any other concerns about regressivity, I offer that this fee is waived for our 2,000 plus most vulnerable Vermonters in this bill on the Lifeline Services Program, and it also retains for all of our prepaid cell phones, will continue to be charged the 2.4% to be fair with that service pricing model. That is the first chunk. I did warn the pro tem this was a longer floor report. The second chunk, all right, really has to do with sections 7 through 13. With these sections will eliminate the telephone personal property tax, a levy dating back to 1947. This tax targets companies involved in telephone lines or businesses. Currently, they pay 2.37%. So the last I was talking about 2.4%, this is 2.37% on the depreciated value, the net book value of their infrastructure for voice services. A 2021 report, a different report, again, these reports actually do help. So they help justify strong, well thought out policy. So this 2021 report by the Vermont Tax Structure Commission recommended scrapping this tax. So this scraps that tax. Reasons include declining revenue and its outdated basis on voice-centric technology. With today's advancements, confusion exists about what the tax covers: voice over IP, bundled services, net book value versus fair market value, et cetera. This bill proposes to repeal the antiquated tax from 1940s and categorize all communications property as real estate within the grand list, similar to how we currently handle electric facilities. So this creates parity with how electric utilities are taxed. This approach ensures consistent treatment for all voice and data communication services, regardless of the underlying technology. Your Senate Finance Committee heard concerns from Property Valuation and Review Department within our tax department on some of the terms included in the version that came from the House. That would have included the following terms as having to be assessed, appraised: distribution hubs, splitters, switching equipment, routers, servers, power equipment, machinery, and other network equipment. This type of equipment has relatively short lifespans and fast depreciation schedules. So based on testimony, those items were removed by your Senate Finance Committee in the substitute amendment before you today. This is where it gets a little messy with the underlying finance report and then the substitute. The Senate Finance Committee report that we are substituting in the calendar replaced this section with a study. But since passing this out of the Senate Finance to meet some aggressive timelines, more information and clarity came forward, and the substitute amendment effectively restores the House language, but not including those questionable equipment types that the PVR had concerns about being able to consistently and fairly assess: the distribution hubs, splitters, switching equipment, routers, and servers. So that is chunk 2. Ready for chunk 3? All right, chunk 3, the last area of this bill is what is now referred to in the substitute amendment as section 14. And it was really inspired by existing statutory requirement for our Agency of Transportation, VTrans, to get some form of compensation for broadband and wireless providers using our state-owned right-of-ways along our roads. Federal law allows state highways departments to be able to collect a fee for the use of roadways only to maintain those roadways. So there are some limitations. So there's a statute that's been in place since 2007. VTrans hasn't implemented the fee because it is incredibly complex, costly, and time-consuming task to determine if a line between two poles may or may not be over our right-of-way, especially when those poles are not always in our state right-of-way, but on personal property, as they often are, or on municipal property. And a lot of times these poles are underground, and then it's very difficult to know if they're actually in the right-of-way or not. So this issue was brought to our attention from a 2022 memo from the auditor addressed to legislative chairs of transportation and finance committees. The House did an excellent job tackling this very difficult and complex issue. Your Senate Finance Committee heard a lot of testimony about the contemplated fee structure and measurement approach for this, and we concluded that indeed this is very complicated, and testimony revealed that it will cost the state as much money to collect it as it would take in for revenues. And very importantly, if we were to pursue it without taking a more incremental approach, it would also burden our broadband providers with a lot of costs getting out tape measures and surveying equipment to track when and where their lines touch our right-of-way. Instead of deploying broadband to every corner of the state, they'd be spending very scarce resources on measuring on whether or not the rope drips into our right-of-way or not. So it is arguable that this statute, it is also arguable that the statute in question conflicts with other statutes charging us to deploy more broadband throughout the state as cheaply and as quickly as possible. For those reasons, your Senate Finance Committee revised the work to charge VTrans to study how other states do this for interjurisdictional benchmarking. Now I'd like to do this section by section. I warned the pro tem, this is a long report, but it's a complex bill, so I just want to put it all out there. I will skip the witness list though. All right, so turning to the language of the bill for a section by section walkthrough, sections 1 and 2 are updating definitions through the chapter to align with existing and federal law definitions. Basically, anytime you have a line where you can call 911, you would be included in this definition. It also clarifies that the charge does apply to voice over IP phone lines. Section 3 changes the contribution method from a 2.4% proportional charge to a flat per line fee of 72 cents. This fee is consistent or below other states. In the report that was generated, it actually said what the highest state out there is West Virginia. They charge $3.36 a month, and Arizona is at 20 cents a month. We are below the average and reasonable compared to our peers. This also includes the Lifeline and Relay subsidy programs for low-income Vermonters to be exempt from this charge. So our most vulnerable Vermonters in parts of programs that have access to these phone line services will not get this 72-cent charge. Section 4 keeps the 2.4% charge for prepaid wireless communication services. So those are the prepaid cards, which we talked about previously. And sections 5 and 6 really expands the support programs in the following order of priority. Vermont, that's actually backwards, so I'm sorry. First priority is, I listed it previously, and I did have this queued up. So the first priority is costs, sorry, right there. Costs of the fiscal agent that manages the fund, and the telecommunications relay services. Those allow people with hearing or speech disabilities to place and receive phone calls. And then it goes to the Vermont Lifeline program, which offers a monthly discount of telephone service for low-income consumers. Vendor E911 services. The system reports phone numbers and locations of information to certified call takers and allow for more efficient routing of the appropriate public safety dispatchers. Then this bill adds to that priority list is the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. The 988 National Call Center Network provides free and confidential support to people in crisis over the phone or through text. And then lastly, if any money is remaining in that waterfall, the Connectivity Fund, which supports Connectivity Initiative grants and the high cost program. All right. Section 7 through 9, a repeal of the telephone property tax. Section 10 requires the communications property be set in the grand list as real estate and taxed at appraisal value, fair market value, modeled after current treatment of electric utility property. It applies to all telecommunications, voice, broadband, and cable television facilities, all subject to the same property tax. It does not apply to CUDs, which are municipal entities. This is what we do for municipal electric territory as well in their own towns, not subject to property taxes. It also applies to tangible personal property, wires, cable, conduit, poles, wireless towers, network equipment, not a network equipment, we dropped that. Communication service providers are required to annually provide to the PVR, Property Value and Review, a sworn inventory of all taxable communications property in the form that it identifies the valuation of their property in each municipality. And PVR is required to annually provide local listers of the valuation of all taxable communications properties in their respective municipalities. Section 11 specifies communications property is not business personal property and therefore is not subject to the local option exemption to avoid double taxation. Section 12 clarifies that communications property owned by a municipality is taxed only if it is located outside of the municipality's territorial limits. And then section 13 appropriates $150,000. I'll leave that to my colleague on appropriations to speak. The last chunk of the sections is just section 14. This is a new section in the substitute amendment from your Senate Finance Committee. It's presented from me, and I will say that I will leave it to maybe the chair of Senate Finance to speak about the vote, but we didn't take a vote, but there were, I believe, 5 Senate Finance members that supported this substitute amendment. So this new section 14 is the substitute amendment that has the Secretary of Transportation in consultation with the Commissioner of Public Service and Secretary of Digital Services conduct a study concerning access to and the use of the public right-of-way in Vermont by telephone, wired, and wireless and broadband companies. In particular, the Secretary shall determine how the right-of-way is currently being accessed and used by such companies in Vermont. In addition, shall review and assess how other jurisdictions outside of Vermont manage and charge for such access and use. Regarding the fiscal note, this will result in an annual revenue of about $8 million. It's approximately $3 million more. That's the first chunk. The first chunk will generate more revenues with a fixed fee, creating equity between our landline providers. So those with landlines should expect, unless they have a really good deal, they should expect a decrease in their monthly fees. And our wireless providers will see more, but that is to pay for E911 services and all those other important services. It does result, so that's generally expected to increase revenues, which will also help the general fund because currently we have been drawing from the general fund to subsidize the shortfall for our enhanced 911 services and others. The second chunk is expected to really shift the $2 million in revenue from the general fund because of the way it will now be classified as property. It will actually shift that to be about a little bit more, 2.5 to an unknown amount. Approximately I'm going to guesstimate, I'm going to play JFO here, 2.5 million to about 3 to 4 million to the ed fund. So it's basically going to be shifting $2 million from the general funds, not this year, but the year after, if I'm not mistaken, to about that same amount plus some to the ed fund in future years out. We did hear from a number of witnesses. Happy to answer or raise those and any questions that are raised. And for that, Mr. President, I spoke to both the finance, my substitute amendment to the finance report. And I would be happy to take questions on this, or I don't know if you do the appropriations next, or if you take the substitute, I'm going to sit down. Okay.
We will now hear the report from the Committee on Appropriations from the Senator from Washington. And I don't know now if your report is to the underlying amendment or the substitute. That's on you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We took up this bill as the underlying bill. We did not, as the underlying report from finance. That is what we looked at. There is one appropriation that the reporter of the report and amendment reference. Section 8, this is a one-time appropriation from the pilot special fund. If I remember correctly, the pilot special fund does have something like $13 million in it. There's $150,000 from that that will be appropriated to the Division of Property Valuation Review for the purpose of creating a property valuation model for communication property. We thought that was fine use of that money in this bill, and we voted 502. But the bill passed in concurrence with the report from Senate Finance.
So the current question is, shall the Senate substitute the amendment as offered by Senator from Chittenden to replace the finance report? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Chittenden North.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I interrogate the reporter of the bill, substitute amendment, and so forth?
The senator is interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm wondering if you've read the Kingston Coal study from 2015.
I have not.
Kingston's coal study from 2015 did a study. What's in rights of way. I just shudder to think that we would recommend another study when we could be collecting this revenue that we've been not collecting for 17 years. We've had this on the books. This is not a new tax or fee. This rental charge has been in statute for a long, long time. And I hear us putting it off yet again. So I have a new amendment myself that could be passed out to address this.
Are you finished interrogating with questions?
Okay.
Or,
I'm
okay,
going to continue.
I recognize that, but sorry, are you asking questions of the senator or are you
I'm
trying to
asking
offer them?
questions, Senator.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll try to stay in that lane. I understand that page 4279, sections D1 in today's calendar, shows the breadth of equipment that's currently eligible to be taxed. But I understand that massive amounts of communications property would be removed from this definition, which is revenue the state would be giving up. That is machinery, distribution hubs, splitters, switching equipment, routers, servers, power equipment, and any other network equipment can no longer be taxed if and when the agency of transportation gets its inventory together. Have you an estimate of the value of the equipment that your amendment plans to exempt?
Mr. President, I appreciate the question. So I want to confirm that the question regarding the exempted equipment is from the second chunk. And then the right-of-way commentary question, I believe, is from the third chunk. And I just want to offer some perspective I have on the distinction between the two. So on the third chunk, the right-of-way, we are also federally preempted to only charge for not the value of the equipment, but the maintenance of the roads. So that state right-of-way, the use of that state right-of-way that other states do, we would not be able to use the assessed equipment, but instead what we could expect to be a fair assessment to maintain the roadways, trimming branches, weed whacking, and so on. So I would not expect, Mr. President, that the exemption of wireless, of not wireless towers, but of the machinery, distribution hubs, splitters, and so on to affect the potential revenues of any future state right-of-way fee that could be a recommendation from the report we are proposing.
Thank you. Did I hear you say that broadband providers would be burdened in some way if required to submit the information about where their information, about their data as to where their lines are installed?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I want to just orient the audience. That question would really be germane, I think, to the third chunk where it's on the state right of way. The burdens that were raised as concerns is that either the state would have to go out and look at, we have maps come in, and a gentleman from the GIS characterized this with a visual on the screen showing, for just one example, the neighborhood just south of here, that it is very hard to determine when a rope line goes between one pole to the next pole and whether or not it is in the state right of way, or if it's in a municipal right of way, or if it's in the right of way at all, as well as underground. So the question was, would it be a burden to the broadband providers? Yes, if they don't have that data in a format that is easily consumable by us, then it would require attention, possibly surveying, civil engineers going out and measuring where things are landing, as well as getting out tape measures for the ropes themselves. So we did hear from from different entities that would be affected by this, that it would be burdensome for them to collect all of and submit all that data to a state entity, which also shared concerns about protecting that from potential public records access or otherwise disclosure.
Thank you. My understanding is that V-Trans is required to collect reasonable rent from providers of broadband or wireless communication facilities or services within the state rights of way. And in fact, they have a permit that must be filled out by anyone who wants to lay fiber, for example. And that's been in effect since 2015. So I'm not sure why V-Trans doesn't know where these things are when they've got permits filed from the providers of these services.
So my understanding is those permits collect limited amounts of information. So they collect information about what they're going to do over what stretch, but that is different than having the actual data, the overlaid GIS data of where that pole is going to intersect with all of the different possible bends and corners, as well as when they do work with private entities and municipal entities. So the permits that they're issuing does not include all the comprehensive data that would be necessary to map systematically what is using our right of way. Mr. President.
You may quote from a letter from Doug Hoffer, State Auditor, dated May 31st, 2022.
Without objection, you may, as long as it's within the form of a question, because at the moment you've got a senator that you're interrogating.
Sure. Thank you. I'm wondering if you're familiar with this fact, fellow senator, that quote, V-Trans has not yet entered into lease agreement with broadband and wireless providers for use of state highway right-of-way, in part because they have yet to determine what rates they should charge. V-Trans drafted rates in 2016 and 2017 and sought feedback from the Public Service Department, but has yet to finalize any rates. V-Trans also does not know the extent to which broadband providers are using state-owned rights of way. For example, V-Trans does not know how many miles of fiber are within the state highway rights of way. And again, my question is, are you familiar with the fact that there actually have been rates proposed? So it's not that this is an unknown.
I am familiar with that rates, but the House proposed rates. The proposed rate from the House was based on which county you were in with a very differential rate based on the population of that county. I raised concerns that I represent Chittenden County. We got a lot of roads up that way, but we also have some communities in Chittenden County that don't have a lot of roads. I think of my good friends in Bolton, out in Huntington. I think of my friends up in Westford, even parts of Essex. So that rate structure contemplated by the House, and they did great work, I feel would have disadvantaged very rural communities just because they were in that county. A lot of people like to pick on. Did that answer your question, Mr. President?
Thank you. I'm wondering why there's not a financial model tied to this, because that is how one could determine with the right-of-way survey, that is the inventory that is being done, tied to a GIS map, yet there's no financial model tied to it, in contrast to the other inventory that's discussed in this bill, which is of communications equipment that has a financial model to it, but doesn't have a GIS attached to it. And I think those two inventories going at the same time, and they do have some overlap, should be in sync so that data can be shared when both these inventories are done. And in fact, the Public Safety Communications Task Force, which is hired a contractor to go out and look at public safety infrastructure, could also tie their data into this, and we could actually learn something instead of studying this over the next few years.
Detecting a question in there, and I would say a concern was raised that some of the approaches to this would become monumental tasks that would involve not just broadband communications providers, but also electric utilities as well as Vermont gas utilities on not just state-owned right-of-ways, but also municipal right-of-ways as well as private land. With collecting all of that data, the reason why I believe that we have rehomed this, regrounded it back to where it started, looking at just state-owned roads, right-of-way use, is because of the scarcity of resources. That to do such a chore, such a task, falls beyond the scope of what V-Trans is really charged with, which is keeping our roads safe. But Mr. President, I would say the senator's points are very well received, and that we need to do better at making sure our emergency management services are resilient, responsive, and reliable. To what degree the state needs to know where those resources are through a V-Trans right-of-way study. That is something I think we should all come back next year, for those of us that get the petitions, all right, and address that. I'm trying to keep it light,
I understood from conversation within the Finance Committee, at least, that there was some concern about the costs to conduct an inventory. Is that a concern of yours as well?
It is a concern of mine, not just the cost to the state, Mr. President, but also the cost to as the original Senate Finance report contemplated, both the broadband providers, the electric utilities, as well as the gas companies. There is a cost associated to finding out if those pipes are in or out of the roadway, above or below ground, that we didn't feel ready to to burden, require, and tell, I believe, Mr. President, we answer some of the senator's very good questions about how we're managing and how we are regulating and what we are expecting of all of our regulated utilities in the state.
Thank you. I'm concerned that there's a ready revenue source, at least for the state expenses. As I presented to the Finance Committee a few weeks ago, there is approximately $10 million of unencumbered funds right now out of the $11 million currently assigned as of fiscal year 22, public safety for regional dispatch. And that money could go a long way in helping determine what's in the rights of way, as well as yielding 100-fold or more down the line, because these fees are something we would collect every year. It's not just a one-time inventory and then a one-time collection. These, if you're familiar with these reports, there's a per fiber strand per month per mile fee, for example, that they showed in many areas around the country. So other people are figuring out how to do this. I'm concerned that if Vermont, do you think that Vermont doesn't have the wherewithal to collect on something that has been in statute for 17 years?
I think Vermont does a lot of great things, and I think Vermont is a small state. And I think as a senator in this chamber, in this Senate, I listen to those that testify before us. And when concerns are raised from those that are doing this work day in, day out, that the scope is, to quote the terms, a monumental task that would require and demand a great deal of time and resources that might be recovered by those fees, while also burdening our broadband providers and other regulated entities. I listened to that concern, and we saw, I personally in this amendment with my name on it, see this as a better path forward to get more an incremental step to solve this or to address the concerns raised by the senator, Mr. President.
While in finance, several weeks ago, I heard from David Healy, who is director of.
What is your point of order, Senator from Windsor?
Mr. President, I believe that the line of questioning that we're seeing from the interrogator is potentially in conflict with the rule we have around a question, our limitations on questioning. And essentially, it seems like the questioner is trying to make arguments within their questions, as well as state kind of, I would say the question is meant to create an argument rather than obtain information. And I don't feel that that falls within our rules of procedure.
Let me consult for a moment. Thank you, Senator from Windsor. We're moving from the green rules book all the way to the big fat Mason's book here. So, Manual of Legislative Procedure. As you've often seen sometimes, I will find your point of order not well taken. However, I will read the procedure under section 114, asking questions of members to help the interrogator maybe consider their line of questioning to fit within as tightly as possible the legislative procedures. So under section 114, asking questions of members, section 6, purpose of a question is to obtain information and not to supply it to the body. A question may not contain statements of fact unless they be necessary to make the question intelligible and can be authenticated. And the final sentence is, neither should a question contain arguments. So I would ask the senator from Chittenden North to condense these questions, if possible, to be questions to ascertain information that the interrogator doesn't know, and then relieve the respondent of their circumstances, and then make your arguments for your case.
Okay.
Senators shall continue.
I will conclude my interrogation. Thank you.
Question is,
Shall the Senate substitute the amendment as offered by the senator from Chittenden Southeast for the support of bill? I make the question, Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to make clear, the Senate Finance Committee took testimony on the sections about electric telecommunications property. When we first took it, we asked the tax department if they had the capacity to know the market value of all of that broad range of telecommunications property. And the response we got back finally was that no, they didn't. Right now, that property, if the town chooses, is being taxed as business personal property. So it is being taxed, it can be taxed by the municipality. The proposal would be to move it all to real property and to do it at present market value. They said they can't do it. They came back after the bill wrote out and said, well, if we limited it, yeah, they could do it. And that's what this bill reflects. There's been a lot of talk about it's been referenced in committee that we have $22 million. The $22 million was a grant to the Department of Public Safety for the improvement of public safety communications. It's been referenced when we did the whole dispatch bill. The fact is, it is very limited and it is a federal grant to state police. We don't have the power to do that. The issue with the right-of-way is we had the presentation from GIS, and that's what the reference study was about. We know where the right-of-way is. We know where the center line of the road is, but we don't have enough detail. We know where the poles are, but we don't know, the pole is not that exact. And so we don't know, the right-of-way is so many feet from the center line of the road. GIS doesn't have that much ability to do that, which means every pole would have to go out and they'd have to measure from the center line to the pole to determine if it's in the right-of-way. And I'm willing to bet that some of those poles are going to be half in the right-of-way or quarter in the right-of-way, and we're going to have to make a decision what to do about them. The tax has not been collected. I must have voted for it, but I don't remember it. 17 years ago, we said, you'll collect the tax unless you determine, this is Department of Transportation, that the public good of having that pole there outweighs the cost or your ability to set the tax. They have used that out that we gave them, saying it is a greater public benefit to have a pole that brings electricity and telecommunications for 17 years. So this bill came out to make them, based on the auditor's report, pay the fee. We've listened, it is a lot more complex issue, and it would take a fair amount of money and time, and there's no appropriation in here, and there's no money available to go out and measure those. And we've been trying to find that balance again between VTran's ability to do that. We're asking them to look at how other states do. We've also heard that there's a federal limit on what we can charge and what we can do. As far as we can figure out, we don't have hundreds of millions of dollars sitting out there waiting for us to collect it. And we need to know in some way what it's going to cost and how other states do deal with that.
Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. To reinforce and add to the comments of the senator from Washington, one of the major concerns we had is whether or not it would cost more to do the inventory and calculation than any potential return on investment from taxation. Absent any information about what it's going to cost to do this, we felt it was premature and really not proper to go on an expedition, the end of which we could not predict. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the senator for his presentation of H 657. I just think that looking back before he started his presentation, that it would have been a lot easier for his landline neighbor that was getting charged a buck something to go back down to the 13 cents like all his family members. And I think that might get him a vote. And I think it might be more equitable in that way, but I guess that's just not how we roll. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank the Finance Committee. I think they've come up with a good solution here, and I'm very appreciative that they found a long-term funding solution to the Universal Service Fund and support of the 911 system. That is very important to our state. The Government Operations Committee has not always agreed with the Finance Committee this year on the issue of 911, and I just wanted to stand to say thank you for this solution. And I thought the senator from Chittenden Southeast did an excellent job with his very long report. Thank you.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the presenter of amendment?
The bill, the report, and the amendment.
Yes.
It is interrogated.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you heard any testimony from these broadband providers that moving forward too quickly would impact the ability for them to extend broadband to every corner of Vermont, and if so, how?
Thank you, Mr. President. My memory of whether or not that was in official testimony or if it was in follow-up emails and hallway conversations escapes me, but I will say I heard personally, if not with the official people that we did take testimony from, indeed it would. So the biggest concern with going too fast on this is it is expensive to get broadband service to the far rural corners of this state. And if we mandated to them that they need to supply in a very specific technical format where their lines are or aren't inside of which right-of-ways, be it public, be it state, municipal, or private, it would greatly distract them from their other priorities at this time. And I remember one of them saying, just tell me what you want me to pay, don't make me go out with a tape measure, please, is what the sentiment I heard was.
I appreciate that. I'm also wondering if, and you may not know this because I realize this is a little outside, but if we have a sense of what percentage of Vermonters still don't have access to high-speed broadband.
I don't have that off the top of my mind, Mr. President.
Okay, I thank the senator.
Senator from Chittenden North.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to double check on the facts. I heard $22 million, but I believe that 9 million of federal money plus $11 million of state money is only $20 million. And in fact, that $11 million of state money, only 1 million is thus far allocated. So there's 10 million left. That money could be used to find a new revenue source. That revenue source could be what's in the rights of way. We were supposed to map the utilities as a state through our GIS department back in 1989. It was supposed to take 1 year. It never happened. I really worry this many years hence that it will ever get done, especially when there's always another study to do instead of an actual inventory. I had drafted an amendment, which I will not be introducing, but I do want to share with you a note received from, if I may.
May
I?
Without
quote from
objection,
a
you may.
note From David Healy, who was executive director of GIS when the department started up. He wrote this to Chair of Transportation Perchlik and others. He wrote, quote, I'm writing to support passage of H 657 with Senator Renner's amendment regarding the development of a GIS-based utility infrastructure database in our public rights of way. I was the author of the legislation that created the Vermont GIS in 1988. As part of the office of GIS, as part of the legislation, the Office of GIS, now called BCGI, was tasked with developing the plan for a statewide GIS system and to identify key databases to support local and state planning. Utility infrastructure was a key recommendation that was never fulfilled. This bill, meaning the amendment that I was about to introduce, but I will withhold, this bill attempts to rectify that. I believe VTrans could manage a contractor developing this database for about 400,000 to 500,000. These funds could come from the $11 million in FY '22 for regional dispatch. The public safety need for this is very important, but also to eventually become a basis for creating a financing mechanism for possible funding of a public safety communications and cellular development system. I believe that VTrans staff could manage such a contract with the funding proposed in this bill. End of quote. And I can only second. And third, the fact that we have the money, it's just the political will. Thank you.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance did look into the mapping. We do know where the poles are, and they're on our GIS system from GMP, VEC, and WEC. Those are our three major providers. The bill asked the Department of Public Service to require that your small municipals report where their poles and wires are. We just haven't gotten to them. So shortly, as soon as they get that report in, we will have all the poles and wires mapped. So we know where they are. We just don't, and we just don't have the specificity to within feet to say that they are absolutely in the public right of way. GIS at this point just isn't that accurate.
Question is, shall the Senate substitute the amendment as offered by Senator from Chittenden for the report of the Committee on Finance? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have substituted the report of the amendment as offered by the Senator from Chittenden for the report of the Committee on Finance. Question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by, actually, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Finance as substituted? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have adopted the report of the Committee on Finance as substituted. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of H 657. We now have up for consideration Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I will move to adjourn. And my thought is that we would come back at 4:30. And this is in part to allow more preparations for the yield bill debate, which we will take up immediately upon gaveling back in. Yes, immediately upon gaveling back in, we will take it up. So again, in part, this is to allow some time for amendments that have been circulating to be viewed. So with that said, Mr. President, I would ask people, not just for the moment, but for the next 3 days, please be here when we are due to come back in. I include myself in that as well as all of you. The goal is not to continue into the night. The goal is to work efficiently, have everybody get sleep, have everybody get meals. But we have, before our scheduled departure, we have 3 days, now 2.5. And we need every minute of that time. So if you could be here at 4:30 for the gavel, much appreciated. And pending announcements, I would move that we adjourn until 4:30.
We will have announcements. I believe your motion was to recess till 4:30, not to adjourn until 4:30.
Precisely.
That's what I thought. Are there any announcements? Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have two announcements. First, Senate Education will meet 10 minutes after the fall of the gavel. And then second, pending its entry on the calendar for notice, I move that S204, an act relating to supporting Vermont's young readers through evidence-based literacy instruction, be taken up for immediate consideration for purposes of considering the House proposal amendment and with the intent of requesting the appointment of a committee conference. Thank you.
Senator from Bennington has moved that pending its entry on the notice calendar, he moves that the S204, an act relating to supporting Vermont's young readers through evidence-based literacy instructions, be taken up for immediate consideration for purposes of considering the House proposal of amendment and with the intent of requesting the appointment of a committee of conference. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have done that. We now have up for considering S204. S204 was passed and sent to the House. The House has returned the bill with proposal of amendment. The pending question is, shall the Senate concur with the House proposal of amendment? Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Education would request a committee of conference at this time. Thank you.
The senator from Bennington requests that the Senate not concur with the House proposal of amendment and that a committee of conference be appointed. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have not concurred with the House proposal of amendment, and you've requested a committee of conference. With that in mind, the Committee on Committees has met, and by way of announcement for the Committee on Committees, following senators are appointed to the Committee of Conference on S204. Senators Campion, Senator Gulick, and Senator Weeks. Are there any other announcements? I guess one question about that might be interesting would be whether the senator from Bennington might be interested in suspending the rules in order to message your action taken on S204 to the House forthwith.
Mr. President, in consultation with the Senator from Bennington, yes, he would, please.
Senator from Bennington moves that the Senate suspend its rules in order to message your action taken on S204 to the House forthwith. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the Senate will message its action to the House forthwith. Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder to Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee members, we will meet at 9 a.m. to review bills coming back over from the House.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Institutions Committee Conference will meet immediately after follow the gap. Thanks.
Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Government Operations will meet at 3:15. Thank you.
Anybody other than the senator from Wyndham? No, Senator from Wyndham.
Senate Judiciary Committee of Conference will meet in about 3 minutes in Senate Judiciary.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet immediately after the fall of the gavel. We have an amendment to the yield bill to see if we can do any more on, and at least 5 bills, I believe, to finish.
Any further announcements? Seeing none, the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that Senate stand in recess till 4:30. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the Senate will stand in recess till 4:30.